Hello, fellow Viewfinders Club members who are practicing social distancing. Many of you know that I love doing nature and wildlife photography. It seems that I have now traveled to all 7 continents on photographic adventures. And every time I return home, I want very much to edit my images and compile them into big, engaging stories of these adventures so that I might both share them and relive them. Surprisingly, several club members asked me if I could tell the story of my own personal journey in creating video stories. So I created this video to share my motivations and some approaches to best video practice, some editing tips, and some comments about useful equipment for making your own video stories. I started creating stories using slideshows composed with still images, but I quickly found a better method, namely making high-definition videos using my still images combined with narration, music, and environmental sounds. However, no matter how I tried, these early videos lacked convincing scenes of the fluidity of the animals' natural behaviors and interactions. Thus, during the course of taking thousands of photographs, I began to occasionally push the video buttons on my cameras. Now, let me show you why a still photographer should press the video button. Video does require learning new skills, but it is fun and very rewarding. Why make videos? I can tell a story with stills. Yes, but videos can tell better stories and combine small stories into a big story. Okay, when should you press the video button? One can press the video button incidentally, on the spur of the moment, or planfully. Here are some examples. The first one was an incidental video recording. The second one was more planful. Soon enough, we see something moving in the grass on the west bank of the river. It's another big female. She's hunting upriver along the bank. This is story building using only still images. Eventually, she disappears into the forest. And about this time, we hear splashing upriver and discover a family of giant river otters. When we arrived, the otters were splashing around, playing and calling out to each other. These otters grow to 6 feet in length and can weigh up to 70 pounds. They live in large family groups and feed almost exclusively on fish. I was quite surprised, as were the otters, when the female jaguar emerged on the riverbank from the forest. The otters became increasingly agitated. When giant river otters get upset, they begin to snort, bark, and make chattering noises like an angry typewriter. With all the ruckus, the mother came out of the den where she had been feeding her pups. She swam underwater to join the rest of the family. Then, while I was making an adjustment to my camera, she gave a vocal command and the entire family charged the jaguar, creating a huge wave which swept over it. Special thanks to Paul Armstrong for that otter charge clip. In pressing the video button, it's better to be planful. Jaguars are essentially forest dwellers, but they do love riverbanks, where they can warm in the morning sun. Jaguars are opportunistic hunters and no prey is too big for them. One bite can kill a cow or even a big caiman. A National Geographic photographer sat in a skiff for 4 days at the same place I had sat for about 15 minutes. He had a plan to record video of the scarface hunting. Here is part of his story.
Those who know him call him Scarface, from a wound he earned clawing his way to supremacy. His territory crawls with monsters. Caimans, cousins of the crocodile, are waiting to grab almost anything that comes near the water. But it's Scarface they fear, because where the land ends, his hunting ground begins. He's the top predator in a land of predators, the best of the best.
So, how do we make a planful video? What are the components? Plan to shoot different scene types. These include an establishing shot and other wide-angle shots, mid-range shots centered on or zooming in on the actors, close-up shots and very close-ups, for example, eyes only, shots from high up and looking down, shots from low down, looking up, moving the camera around, into, and through objects. We will see examples of these basic video scene options, but first let's consider some technical issues. You need to pay attention to these technical issues. Aspect ratios are important. You want to fit your video into a high-definition TV format. That's 1920 by 1080p. Also fitting the same space is 4K Cinematic, which is 496 by 260 pixels. Transitions between scenes include hard cuts, dissolves, flips, wipes, etc. Ken Burns effects are very important and often used. You'll see a lot in my examples. These include panning, zooming, rotating, and so forth. Slower movements are much better than faster ones. Special effects, CGI mosaics, spins, light streaks, bursts, and so on. These are best to limit or omit because they are quite distracting. Let's now look at examples of these basic transition options. Hard cut, cross dissolve, fade to black, flip, Ken Burns transitions, in and rotate, pan right, out and left. Let's look at the different types of scenes and shooting angles that tell this next story. Let's also look to see how pace and flow of time matter. The next morning dawned with considerable fog. Our first animal sightings were rather ghostly. Then we saw beside the sandy road the tracks of 2 cheetahs. After some tracking and backtracking, we finally located them as they patrolled their territory. These 2 grown brothers were going about their morning patrol with little concern for us. They were a beautiful sight in the fog and the flat morning light. Cheetahs, like greyhounds, are built for sprinting. They have deep chests, compact heads, long legs and bodies, and have substantial tails for balancing and quartering at speed. They are the fastest land mammal and can attain speed bursts of 60 miles an hour or slightly more. More typically, they chase at about 40 miles an hour to be able to follow their sideways darting prey. There was a lot of territorial marking, both at trees and even in trees. Unlike wild dogs and even hyenas, cheetahs are not long-distance runners. They prefer to begin their chases at less than 100 meters, but they only succeed in catching their prey about 20 to 30% of the time. Adolescent cheetahs learning to hunt are particularly inept at getting close enough before starting their runs. Cheetahs are active and hunt during the daytime when lions and hyenas are less active. Preferred prey are antelopes and gazelles that are somewhat smaller than the cheetah. However, in the Pinda area, the larger nyala is frequently taken, especially when it is not full grown. In making a wildlife video, one must plan to capture different types of action and behaviors. For example, just resting and looking around, walking and running, eating, bathing and grooming, hunting, mating, and aggression. First, the watching story using only stills, then video. First, the walking story using stills, then the story by video. Again, first the walking story using stills, then the story by video. When the eating story involves a carnivore, skip the gore. This elephant was gored to death by a bull elephant in must. A jaguar's favorite food is a large rodent called a capybara. It can weigh up to 100 pounds and is often seen in the water and is capable of swimming underwater for great distances. First the Bull and Must story using stills, then the story by video. Opening a big story with titles, animation, and narration. Example number 1. Cheetahs are the third largest of the big cats in Africa. In Africa, cheetahs range from the south to the east and north as seen on this map. Their range has been shrinking due to habitat loss, poaching, and other human interferences. They are quite slender in build, or tall, ranging in height from 28 to 35 inches at the shoulder, and weigh from 46 to 160 pounds. We are going to look at cheetahs from Kenya, Tanzania, and 2 locations in South Africa. As we will see, cheetahs inhabit dry forest, scrub forest, and savannas. Example number 2, opening with maps of the journey. In late August of 2017, my friend Bob Slott and I returned to South Africa for another photographic adventure. We planned to spend a week in the Sabi Sabi Wildlife Reserve, which is renowned for its leopards, its classy lodges, and its savvy rangers and trackers. Last year, in September 2016, we spent a week there and were introduced to the thrill of close encounters with its leopards. Bob and I are well-traveled wildlife photographers, but we were gobsmacked to find ourselves sitting in a completely open and topless safari truck as the leopards looked at us in the eyes and strolled past within a few feet. Example number 3, opening with maps and a workshop approach. Winter lingers into April on Cape Cod, so I signed up for Matthew Studebaker's Spring Bird Workshop held 90 miles south of Tucson, Arizona. On arrival and driving in 90-degree sunshine, I was dreaming of photographing many new bird species for me, including some iconic Arizona birds and hard-to-find migrating warblers. I typically locate birds to photograph by sight, but in this workshop, most birds would be brought towards us with recorded bird calls. I've included examples of these sounds in this video of the 46 species I photographed during my 4 days in the Arizona sun. Example 4, a story with 2 beginnings. My long-anticipated and obsessively planned for Antarctic expedition began and almost ended on December 28, 2018. I arrived early at Logan Airport for my first flight, but it was repeatedly delayed and then canceled. There was no way to get to Miami in time for my booked flights to South America. I was at great risk for arriving in Ushuaia, Argentina after my expedition ship would have sailed. Then, after an overnight stay at Logan, I was most fortunate to obtain the very last available seats for a new set of flights from Boston to Panama City to Buenos Aires and then on to Ushuaia. I finally arrived in Ushuaia with only an hour to spare before the ship sailed. The Resolute was to be our base of operations for the next 20 days. That's me at the back of the bus, exhausted after 30 hours without sleep. The expedition began with champagne on the afterdeck as we sailed down the Drake Channel toward Tierra del Fuego and the South Atlantic Ocean. The overall expedition route is Ushuaia to the Falklands, to South Georgia, to Elephant Island, to the Antarctic continent, and then back to Ushuaia. 20 days in all. Now for something different. We have considered the why, the motivations to tell better and bigger stories, the when, shooting planfully or on the spur of the moment, the what, different kinds of scenes, transitions, and behaviors, the how to introduce stories using titles, narration, and animation. So now let's take a quick look at with what? What are the different kinds of video making equipment? The first category of equipment needed for video making are cameras. These include digital, mirrorless, iPhone, action, and drone cameras that provide the following features. Resolution of 4K and 1080p with aspect ratios of 16:9 and 17:9. Frame rates that are normal and slow motion. The normal ones are 24 and 30 frames per second. Slow motion, 60 and 120 frames per second. Shutter speeds that correspond to these. 1/48th of a second for 24 and 1/60th of a second for 30 frames per second in the normal category. Stabilization, in-body or IBIS and or lens stabilization. Focusing, continuous autofocus and single autofocus with manual assist. I am recommending digital mirrorless cameras with electronic viewfinders or EVFs because you can clearly see what you are recording even in bright light. No DSLR mirror lockup occurs, thus preventing phase detect autofocus. The video should use the entire sensor and not crop down, which would diminish wide-angle views. Among the better choices for mirrorless 4K and 1080p cameras are these. With the Micro Four Thirds cameras, the Olympus M1 Mark III, the Panasonic GH5, and the Blackmagic 4K are best. With ASPC sensor size cameras, the Fuji X-T3 and T4, the Nikon Z6, and the top of the Sony 6000 series. With full-frame cameras, the Nikon Z7, the Panasonic SH1, and the Canon R5. As we'll see, full-frame sensor is overkill. You don't need a sensor with many megabytes, such as the Nikon's 40 or 50 for some Canons. Instead, you need throughput. For example, a 1080p still image is only 2.1 megapixels. A 4K still equals 8.1 megapixels. But at 30 frames a second, you are pushing 243 megapixels per second. This is one of the reasons that Micro 4K mirrorless bodies are used by many video makers. Digital mirrorless cameras with electronic viewfinders differ in their ability to stabilize and focus video. As we said before, stabilization can occur in body with or without lens stabilization. The best IBIS is the Olympus M1 Mark III, then the GH5, the Nikon Z6 and Z7. Lenses of all brands are roughly equivalent in their stabilization ability. With regard to focusing during video, continuous autofocus using phase detect is absolutely the best, but you also need single autofocus with manual corrections. Today, the best continuous autofocus is found in Olympus cameras, then Nikon Zs. Others use various types of contrast focusing. Manual focus assist with focus peaking is critical for low light and contrasty backgrounds. Look for these features. Smartphone cameras, especially iPhones, provide the needed facilities for good video. Resolution of 4K and 1080p with various aspect ratios, frame rates that are both normal and slow motion. The lenses have fixed apertures with exposure controlled by shutter speed and neutral density filters. With regard to stabilization, both lens and digital stabilization are available, and these phones can be gimbaled. With regard to focusing, these smartphones are very good. Have continuous autofocus, single autofocus, and manual focusing. The Filmic Pro app makes the smartphone a great video cam and provides focus peaking, zebra bars, waveform monitoring, and so on. Next, let's consider action cams, such as the Osmo Pocket, GoPros, and TG6s, and other underwater cameras. The advantages are that they are small, they go anywhere, they're easy to use, and so on. They do 4K and 1080p resolutions, they have many shutter speeds, frame rates, they all have micro SD cards, and so on. They can use neutral density filters so that it can handle even bright light. The Osmo Pocket is the one that I use. It is a tiny 3-axis gimbal. It has object tracking, time-lapse, 2 built-in noise-canceling microphones, a remote control app via the iPhone, and so on. Now, GoPros, everyone knows something about them. They're waterproof, they have some stabilization, many mounts, 3 different models. The TG6 is Olympus's action camera, built to be very rugged and waterproof. It has full video capabilities. It has macro with flash, geologging and tracking, RAW plus JPEG images, as well as 4K and slow motion video. Here is what my action cams look like. Here we see a gimbal which fits the mirrorless camera above it. The gimbal keeps the horizon level and steady. This package is a whole lot bigger than the Osmo Pocket. This shows the Osmo 2, which is a 3-axis gimbal for a smartphone. It keeps the horizon level as you shoot. Here is a look at my smartphone and action cam accessories. First, my add-on lenses and neutral density filters. Here are my selfie stick and iPhone remote. This shows my Osmo 3-axis gimbal and my 5th-axis stabilizer from Scotty Makes Things. Here's a clip of 4K video shot on the Osmo Pocket, which has a 3-axis gimbal. The Osmo Pocket itself is mounted on the 4th-axis handheld vertical bounce stabilizer created by Scotty Makes Things. The 3-axis gimbal keeps the horizon level, and the 4th-axis device eliminates the camera's vertical bouncing. Look at the actual tipping and bouncing of the truck and its occupants. What about drones with cameras? Well, they provide videos of the scenes with the camera actually moving above and below the horizon and around and through objects. They have excellent 1080p and 4K resolutions. They can yield normal motion and slow motion frame rates. They have smartphone apps for full control of the camera while flying, and they are stabilized in 3-axis and have micro SD cards for storing big files. However, the FAA has very strong limits on where, how high, and when to fly drones. Some additional equipment is needed for video cameras. The first of these are neutral density filters. Given the normal frame rates with shutter speeds at 1/48th of a second and 1/60th of a second, neutral density filters are needed when shooting in bright light. I recommend using high-quality variable neutral density filters with 8 to 10 stops of light reduction. For example, the Aurora brand 2000 or 128. Avoid inexpensive neutral density filters that have color shifts and tints. How about microphones? External mics are much better than in-camera ones. Some are self-powered, others powered by the camera. Some are wireless, but most are connected by wire. I use mostly shotgun microphones as they are very directional. Basically, with microphones, you get what you pay for. Here are some examples of neutral density filters that I used, the magnetic mounts I use so that I can remove them quickly, and the various microphones that I use on my cameras. Some types of support equipment are needed for video making. First is a tripod. A stable platform prevents jerky, unwatchable videos. It should be easily portable and lightweight. For example, the Peak Design Travel Tripod is what I use. Fluid head. A fluid head will smoothly move the camera horizontally and vertically and prevent losing a level horizon. A gimbaled ball head does much the same thing. It is a specially designed ball head to keep everything level with the horizon. I use the unique ball. A head leveler. This mounts on top of the tripod to level the camera without having to adjust the tripod legs. Here are some examples. The 2 fluid heads that I use to support my cameras are a Manfrotto compact fluid head and a Gitzo gimbaled fluid head. The gimbaled ball head that I use is made by Unique. This is one of my compact head levelers that you mount on top of the tripod so that you don't have to adjust its legs to get your horizon level. Music and sound effects. Why plan for music and sounds? It's because they are almost as important as the visual images. They set and amplify the emotional tones during the story, and sound effects add reality and impact to the visuals. Copyrighted music is for home use without permission. YouTube scans for it, and it requires that you affirm your permissions. Licensed use music. You have full use rights, but it can be pricey. Artlist is a service that provides lifetime use, hundreds of selections to download, and most affordable annual unlimited download memberships. Sound effects. Some come with editing software, and many come with Artlist subscriptions. So let's specifically look at video editing. Video editing requires learning and practicing new skill sets, involves complete concentration so time flies, creates big stories in which one can relive adventures. One's video productions will get better and better. It's a lot of fun for the video makers and their audiences, and during the pandemic, I can still return to Africa and South America as I edit my 2017 to 2019 images and video clips. How about video editing software? Video editing could be described as a kind of four-dimensional photo editing, as it involves choosing and modifying visual still and video images, placing them in sequences on one or more timelines, creating transitions among the various story elements, creating and modifying sounds to enhance the story elements, including environmental and on-location sounds, special sound effects, dialogue, narration, thematic music. And also, video editing software involves creating and placing titles, captions, and credits on the storyline. Video editing software comes in both simple and complex forms. The first of the simple ones is VideoProc, said to be the best for video bloggers. It's available for Windows and Mac. It's a full-featured and easy to use and costs $43 for lifetime use. Story Remix, it is part of the Photos app in Windows 10. It combines your photos and video clips and is said to be somewhat basic. Lightworks is said to be full-featured with a simple user interface. It's Windows only. Free Lite version and a Pro version costs $60. Adobe Rush replaces Premiere Elements, mostly for phones and tablets. It's for iOS, Mac, Android, and Windows. It's $10 a month subscription. iMovie is easy to use, lots of tutorials, and integrated with iPhotos. It's only for Mac OS. Video editing software that is professional and more complex includes the following. LumaVision. It's a full-featured program. Rave reviews when used on iPad Pro with an external drive. iOS only, $30 lifetime with free upgrades. Adobe Premiere. Very full-featured, lots of third-party plugins. Daunting learning curve. Windows and Mac, $21 a month or $240 per year. Final Cut Pro is very full-featured. It's an alternative to Adobe Premiere, OK learning curve, many YouTube tutorials, many plugins, Mac only, $299 lifetime and free upgrades. DaVinci Resolve Studio. It's the newest and very full-featured, good reviews, steepish learning curve, Windows, Mac, and Linux, $299 lifetime. Free version called DaVinci Resolve has some fewer features. Both versions have many YouTube tutorials. When you get to the credits, you are near the end of your video editing journey. Your video editing software will have different credit formats for you to use so that you can give credit to the makers of the images, the video clips, and the music, as well as any actors and others who made the production possible. Here is an example of a credit roll from one of my videos. Let's put it all together. I want to end with a 3.5-minute edited video during which you can see its use of various scene transitions timed to music and sound effects. Note too the wide angles, close-ups, the high and low camera positioning, as well as the shifting light qualities and tempo.
Mm-hmm.